It's a hard day's late night with Ira. Every night it's feeling alright. It's a hard day's late night with Ira. Why not come over tonight? We talk about everything under the moon. Your favorite cartoon, a song you love. You never really know just how it might go. Why don't we get things started? It's a hard day's late night with Ira. It's a hard day's late night with Ira. It's a hard day's late night with Ira. A hard day's late night with Ira.
Tonight's episode of A Hard Day's Late Night with Ira is brought to you by our new sponsor, the Tri-County area's best discount optical chain, See If I Care. Come in, don't come in, see if I care.
Kurt Cobain broke up my band. True story. Near the very end of 1991, I was in Midtown, New York City recording studio. I was working on final mixes for my then band's debut album for MCA, which, after 6 long years together, we were hoping would jumpstart our career, our big career. And we had modeled ourselves on a series of very 80s artists, Prince, The Power Station, In Excess. But the times, they were a-changing. So as I hung around in the lounge area working on this record, I kept looking up at the TV screen, mounted high up on the wall, and it was tuned to MTV. And that was where we wanted to be. We were extremely ambitious young men, and we wanted nothing more than to watch our own video right there, squeezed between Damn Yankees video and the Extreme video. But a cultural shift had just started. Not unlike the pandemic, it started small, specific to a particular region, released with little fanfare into the general population in late September 29th, exactly, the night the video premiered on 120 Minutes. No one saw it coming. Now here we were, 6 weeks later, November. And in my memory, every time I looked up at that TV screen, Smells Like Teen Spirit started playing. It was extremely popular at the time. MTV had it in heavy rotation, which I figure means they played it, I don't know, maybe 8 times a day. It was such a huge departure and such a welcome relief from this decade-long parade of hair metal bands. And as I kept watching and hearing this catchy, angry, thrilling song over and over, I knew instinctively this was the death knell for all those terrible bands, including my own. Those guys in the next room putting a little compression on the vocals on our overproduced, fussy funk rock. They were wasting their time. 6 months later, by mid-1992, that band had broken up and the album was never released. To everyone's benefit, really. So thank you, Kurt and Nirvana, for quickly and decisively laying that all to rest. 80s hair metal and my shitty band. It was time for a change. Before too long, I found myself playing with friends in one little group or another while keeping my ears to the ground for a good opportunity. And it came to me in the form of an old friend. I'd met Kevin Wormacek 10 years earlier when I joined a band called the Fuzztones, a garage rock band. Kevin was their roadie, and since he lived a few neighborhoods away from me in Queens, we became very close friends. So Kevin says, "Hey, I'm working for the Smithereens these days, and they need a guy to drum tech for a one-off show in Hoboken or Hohokus or someplace in New Jersey, I don't recall." I'd done a handful of stage tech shows over the years, most notably single-handedly roadieing the Fleshtones a couple of times down to the original 930 Club in D.C., once on a bill with the Slicky Boys and once with the Chesterfield Kings. So I knew how to plug in guitars and amps and pedals. I certainly knew how to set up a drum kit. So I said yes. Now, I don't remember if Kevin warned me about these guys, but the Smithereens already had a long history at that point. Pat DiNizio, singer-guitarist, Jim Babjack, lead guitar, Dennis Dyken, the drummer, Mike Mazzaros, bassist. They had formed in 1980, and they had an impressive run of big radio singles. Blood and Roses, Behind the Wall of Sleep, House That We Used to Live In, Yesterday Girl, Top of the Pops, Too Much Passion, Only a Memory, which was a #1 single in the U.S. mainstream rock charts in 1988, and A Girl Like You, which made it to #2. Big, crunchy power pop gems, each and every one of them. So they were road veterans, Central Jersey wise guys, and fairly insular. If you weren't cool, they were not going to put up with you. But I think once they realized that I liked Abbott and Costello as much as they did, I was in. Funny, it was the same with the Fleshtones. Both groups were unnaturally obsessed with Bud Abbott. I can't possibly explain this to you, but it was an odd common thread. And so basically, over the next 2.5 years, I made my living as a roadie for the Smithereens. The job of a drum tech is fairly straightforward. You get a read on how the drummer likes his kit set and tuned. You do it exactly the same way every night. It's not rocket science, but critical. During the show, Kevin would take care of the front line, tuning, changing out guitars mostly. My focus, positioned as I was, crouched right behind the loudest bass rig in the world, would be on Dennis, who didn't need much, but he did, for example, want me to swing his vocal microphone into singing position for his harmony parts, then quickly out of the way when he was done, and just generally being there to fix anything that might go wrong. And beside that, it was packing and unpacking all their gear, loading it in and out of a trailer or a cube truck, grunt work, and a lot of driving. Early on, the band would ride together in a van, and Kevin and I would drive separately in a cube truck with the gear. For the longer tours, they hired a tour bus, and the gear would get packed into the bays underneath. There were more shows that year, and then toward the end of 1993, they began recording an album at the Magic Shop in Lower Manhattan, where, as fate would have it, Matthew Cause was working as an intern. I'd already known Matthew for 10 years at that point as well. But what I didn't know, which I wouldn't find out for another year, was that he and Daniel had formed Not a Surf with its first drummer right around that same time. Then in 1994, the Smithereens hit the road again to promote the album that they had recorded with Don Dixon at the Magic Shop, called A Date with the Smithereens. Here was a typical day for me and Kevin. Up at 7 or 8, depending on how long the day's drive was, 3 to 6 hour drive to the next city to load in all the gear into the venue mid-afternoon, to have it all unboxed, set up, tuned, ready to do a sound check, which typically happens between 4 and 6 in the afternoon. Then the doors open, let's say 7, and then there would be one, on some nights, 2 other bands playing 40-minute sets before the Smithereens came on, which would give us a couple of hours to have something to eat, relax a bit, and then it would be showtime. And the show would last about 2 hours with encores and so forth, and then we'd have to immediately break down, pack all the gear back up, load it, which would take about an hour, maybe between the two of us. And it wasn't unusual to get a head start on the next day's drive by booking a hotel 2 or 3 hours along in the right direction, which was possibly my favorite thing about that old school kind of hands-on touring. Late night drives in the middle of nowhere, searching through the crackling radio dial, oldie stations, classic rock, jazz, country. You could always find fun stuff on AM, bizarre call-in shows, George Noory talking to his guests about crop circles, melodramatic Pentecostal preachers. The world is weird and cool in the middle of the night. You never know what you're going to discover. So we'd finally get to our hotel around 2 or 3 a.m. We'd sleep for a couple of hours, and then we'd start again. Now, this was the van and truck tour style. However, with a tour bus, the daily rhythm is very different. You wake up in a narrow bunk on a bus parked next to the place that you're playing. You load in, you do the show, you load back out, and then actually get a good night's sleep before starting in the early afternoon the next day in the next city. A much more civilized way to go, much less grueling, because some of these tours were rather long. On one U.S. tour in 1994, the band went out for 7 straight weeks, 41 shows in 48 days. That is a substantial tour, twice as long as any tour I've taken with my own band in the past 20 years. And then there were opening bands. In the few short years I worked for them, we hosted a handful of really great openers. The Grays, a remarkable but ultimately failed power pop supergroup from L.A., Sixpence None the Richer. Their big single, Kiss Me, wouldn't happen until 1998. There was Watershed from Columbus, Ohio, great little rock pop power trio on Epic Records with a single on the radio. They were great guys. The Ben Folds Five came out with us for a few weeks, very early in their career. They and their crew, about 5 or 6 guys, would hump a full grand piano onto the stage for soundcheck, which Ben would then tune by hand. And then after their set, they would flip the piano over, knock the legs out of the bottom of the piano with a big mallet, hustle it off the edge of the stage and back to their cube truck. It was an amazing thing to watch, to say nothing of the show they put on, which was always incredible. Weezer opened one night in Columbus, Ohio, I think. The Sweater Song had been a hit on the radio for about 15 seconds at that point. And as for the Smithereens, they played about 25 songs, pretty much the same thing every night, give or take. So they were able to relax into the rhythm of the show. Their arrangements had been fine-tuned over a dozen years of touring to build and release. Their audiences were always transported, and the Smithereens always had them just where they wanted them. Pat Denizio was a really fantastic master of ceremonies. His relationship with the audience was very easy, cordial. He loved to make very wry, oblique comments between songs, mostly meant to amuse the band and the crew. Everyone got nicknames. Jimmy was commonly referred to on stage as Tex. Kevin was Chopper. Every night, Pat would back away from the mic and bellow, "Chopper!" to summon Kevin center stage for some reason. It was a great shtick to use this very gruff, angry-looking Kevin Wormacek as a comic foil. I became Ice, which sounds pretty cool, but that's just I-S-E, my initials. And it was a family operation. I was really lucky to land myself in the middle of it. And then after a while, Dennis let me get behind his kit during the encores, which freed him up to go down front, grab a mic, and sing lead on Little Sister by Elvis Presley. So we were all having a pretty good time. But all was not completely well with the Smithereens at the time. They were having some record company issues. In fact, their label dropped them mid-tour at one point, so things were tense occasionally. But one thing remained the same. When they hit the stage, everything else fell away. The show focused them. They allowed them to get out of these moods and just enjoy themselves. And then they were the same guys they were when they were 15, smiling, sweating, rocking out. And they were all very physical. They all played really loud, and Dennis played really hard. It was satisfying to watch. It was cathartic to experience as a player at close range, right up under them. And they were very consistent, even in crappy rented rehearsal rooms. They played like they meant it. They played with the same exuberance, regardless of venue. It was inspiring. They made it look really easy. Because when you're in a band where everyone has fallen to their strongest suit, it kind of is. And this is what I've been watching night after night for 2 years. So I was primed to get back on stage, this time sitting behind the kit myself. And then at the end of 1994, Matthew and Daniel sought me out and gave me a cassette with a bunch of songs that they had recorded in off hours at the Magic Shop. These were the same songs we would re-record for Elektra Records just about a year later. I guess I had to take a step away from being a musician for a bit in order to get closer to being a musician. I did my last shows with them in the middle of 1995, and in December of that year, Not a Surf went into Electric Lady with Rick Ocasek. Now, many years later, I'm older, and I have roadies of my own. And honestly, I'm the kind of person who really enjoys setting up his instrument, going slowly through the process. It's very zen, connects me with it. A drum set can be dozens and dozens of component elements, so it lends itself to a kind of meticulousness that really suits me. So once a roadie, always a roadie. On the road with Not a Surf, I usually get on stage As it's being set, grab a cup of coffee, spend the next hour or two putting the kit together. And even at the end of the night, after playing a long show and having a half hour to cool down, I more often than not go back to the stage to help put the kit away. But honestly, what a luxury it is to be able to walk away from my elaborately and meticulously constructed instrument every night and know it's going to be properly and carefully taken apart and safely put away. And I won't need to worry about loading 30 or 40 pieces of gear out of a venue, or the pack, or if the t-shirts are in from merch, or finding the keys to the bays, or clearing the dressing rooms of everything edible, or on and on and on. It's really a gift. So I treasure the crew and their daily contribution, and I try never to forget what a thankless job it can be. They do all the work, we get all the glory. So I think about the time I spent with the Smithereens a lot. When I tour with Not a Surf, there's still this, we're running away with the circus feeling, a summer camp feeling. It's only going to last a few weeks, but we're all going to have an overload of experiences, and then we'll take a break. We'll see each other in a few weeks, a few months. It's a very strange lifestyle. Not everyone's cut out for it, but I love it. And I can thank the Smithereens for being such a great inspiration exactly at the right time. Actually, I don't think I can thank them enough. God save the Smithereens.
One of the first phenomena I experienced as a member of the crew of a touring band was meeting the members of the band's core fan base, individuals, sometimes couples, who you might see at multiple shows during a tour, and then again the following tour and the one after that. Not everyone can do it, but the ones who do are a direct bridge between an artist and the audience. And I had never considered this before, but it certainly came into high relief when the same thing later happened with Not a Surf. These people become an extended family of sorts, happy faces that come back time after time like friends on holiday. And as a crew member who got to the venue first and left last, we often had as much, if not more, interaction with them as the band did. Two of those people, whom I met back in the 90s, are Rich and Kathy Firestone. You couldn't possibly meet more devoted Smithereens fans than these two.
So let's roll. Hey, you guys, how are you?
Hey.
Thanks
Good.
for talking to me this afternoon. Thanks for making the time. I appreciate it. But the second episode that I'm working on is about my tenure with the Smithereens, which was a really important chapter in my life. It lasted about 2 years. I think I from my recollection, like looking through my papers and stuff, I think I must have joined up with them around the end of 93 or so. And I worked with them through 94 into 95. And then around that time, I joined, Not a Surf started going, and then I left. So what I'm basically doing is sort of reminiscing and trying to get, Smithereens-related stories. I've spoken with Severo. I've spoken with Dennis. I'm going to talk with Jim probably in a couple of days. I might talk with Mark Merman, who you may recall was one of the techs, one of the Roadies guys. And so I thought it would be really fun to talk to you guys who are just like huge fans. So my first question to you is, as a couple, what is your relationship with the Smithereens? Like, how far back does your relationship with the Smithereens go?
How far back? Well, 89. I became aware of them with everybody else for Blood and Roses.
Right.
But I didn't pay too much attention to it.
Right.
It didn't really make a big impact. The first place I heard them for real was about 1988 in a record store. When Green Thoughts came out. Right. And they were playing it in the record store, and it just kind of connected with me. It's a long story about why it had some emotional connection to me.
Sure.
But at that point, I really latched on to them and wanted to go see them live. And just to cut to a long story short, the first time we ever actually met them was after all of that stuff was in 1989.
Yeah.
It was after a show at the Tower Theater in Philadelphia, in which they had an industry party for them at a restaurant club across the street from it.
Right.
And so I was in radio at the time. So being a fan, I kind of thought, well, let's see if I can call in a few favors and find my way either backstage or or to something at the show.
Yeah.
And so we wound up at that time with invites to this little get-together, meet and greet sort of thing, I suppose, at the end of after the show.
Right. Do you guys live in Are you Central Jersey people too?
Nope.
I don't know. I don't even know where you guys live. I have no idea.
I'm from Lebanon, Pennsylvania, originally.
Right.
Kathy's from Flint, Michigan.
Michigan.
Oh, right on. Right on. All American. I love it. That is the heart.
Oh, that's a long story in itself. That has nothing to do with the Smithereens initially.
Right.
But how we got together is a whole other
that'll be a different podcast.
Los Angeles, and our first date was in New York City. So.
Oh, I love it. Well, we'll do a separate podcast about your relationship. I'm okay with that. I'm sure that I bet that'll be interesting too. So, were you guys a couple at that time when you met them for the first time?
89. Yes.
You were, but you weren't necessarily together at that particular meeting, were you?
We weren't married yet. This was about, I guess, 19. I have the date specifically. It might have been 19. It's about a week after they were on Saturday Night Live.
Yes,
wow,
it was
cool.
April 1990. We were married a few months after.
We were married a few months after that, but we were together at the time.
Okay, so so that's how I see that. In my mind's eye, I see this connection between you as a couple and the Smithereens. I somehow, in my mind, I equate the three of you like a one giant thing. So, so let me go back. You guys mentioned to me the other day in passing. I don't know what we were talking about, online or something, and you had a particular memory that, of course, my memory is notoriously freaking awful, but you guys had a fantastic memory whereby. I guess I was working for the band at the time. Now, the story is that that I had been brought into the band by my friend Kevin, who was colloquially known as Chopper in the band, the Chopper. It was Kevin Wormacek was his name, and he was one of my best friends. And I had met Kevin when he was a roadie for a band that I had been in before that called the Fuzz Tones, and so that's where we met. And then and we lived kind of in the same neighborhood in Queens. So as time went by, we remained friends after I left the Fuzz Tones, which was in like 85. But at some point, I guess around 93, I think it was, he called me up and he goes, "Hey, I'm doing these gigs with this band, the Smithereens," who I knew and I heard on the radio. I remember hearing the first time I heard this, really was aware of the Smithereens. I remember where I was. It was like, where were you when Kennedy was shot? I remember I was in my car driving up Woodhaven Boulevard in Queens in my mom's Mazda, and the opening track came on, Strangers When We Meet, right? The opening track on their first album. And I just lost it. I'm like, this is the greatest song I've ever heard. I just loved it. And so when Kevin called me, and this was probably a couple of years after that, he said, I've got this one-off gig for you with the Smithereens. You want to come do it? I jumped at it because I figured, well, how hard is it? Set up some drums and hang out with these guys. So it turned out to be a great job. But you had a memory whereby something about like we had maybe just released a record, because it's a weird timeline that I'm still trying to sort out. It's a little confusing because they were sort of going on they were on one label and they got dropped by Capitol, and then they got picked up by RCA, and then they were dropped and picked up by MCA, or vice versa. I can't quite recall. Even Dennis was a little bit confused about how the timeline. But you had a really funny memory whereby you said that I spotted you, not really knowing you either at the time, that I spotted you and pointed you out to Kevin or someone else in the band. Tell the story from your end, and then I'll fill it in.
Well, I do remember that.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I did. I believe that it was in Allentown, Pennsylvania.
Right.
The club was called Stars.
Yeah.
I had never been there before or since.
Yeah.
I believe it was the weekend at the US Festival, or one that, the US, not the US Festival, one of these big festivals. Maybe it was Woodstock 94.
Okay.
I believe. Woodstock 94 happened that weekend, so the show was postponed for a week. And we had actually gone up to the original date and found out when we got there that the show had been postponed.
Oh, no.
Came back following Saturday. It was the weekend of Woodstock 94. And it was just maybe a couple of weeks after A Date with the Smithereens had come out.
Right.
And I had gotten it. I had the album for however long it was out, for a week. Now, it hadn't been out very long at that time, but I'd already been listening to it very, very much within the previous couple of days. Knew most of the words to the songs.
Right. Sure.
So when we went to the show, the guys would play the songs, and I always planted myself right up front.
You're a down front kind of guy. There's no doubt, Rich.
I was a front row kind of guy back then, bopped along and sang along with every word.
Absolutely.
Off of every word of the song, and I knew all of the new songs already.
Uh-huh.
To an album that hadn't been out for maybe a week or two.
Yeah.
So the show ends, and we decide to hang around and see if we can run in. I don't believe anybody actually would have remembered us from the party that we were at back in 1990.
Right.
But it was always neat to, whatever new album you had just gotten, get a signature on it, shake hands with everybody, say, hey, we met up with the Smithereens after the show. It was great. So we hung around. We're waiting in the back of the club, waiting for the band to come out. And all of a sudden, the doors fly open.
Oh, Lord God.
And as I recall, you come on, pointed right at me and went, there he is. There's that guy. And I'm like, I'm looking around like, what did I do?
Wow.
Oh, shit.
Wow.
Oh, my God. Oh, my God. Should I start running?
That already doesn't sound like me.
How do you know all of these words already?
I love it. Yeah. So I guess the whole show, I must have been watching the show. Like, how does this guy know every word to every song? I guess it didn't dawn on me that someone would just simply buy the record and listen to it so much that they knew every word. I mean, that was the obvious answer to that question. But that is hilarious. And then so what did I call Kevin out? What was it? Just me, or who did I out to?
And everybody came out, and we got our shit. That was the thing I remember the most, is just thinking, what immediately thinking they were going to like throw me out of the place or
well, Kevin,
have me arrested or something. There he is.
Kevin, it's funny because Kevin had a reputation. I mean, Kevin was a friend of mine, so I didn't see him this way, but Kevin had a reputation for being sort of a gruff sort of fellow, and he could be rather intimidating at times. I saw him actively intimidate people on a number of occasions, which sometimes actually came in rather useful. It certainly came in useful when I was in the Fuzz Tones with him, not so much in the Smithereens, but. I think I find that hilarious. And, it's funny, I remember times with Not a Surf where, and this has been a long time, this happened a long time, but there was a period in when we were having this changeover between people buying CDs, and then the internet happened and people started sort of downloading things and for free. And there was a lot of consternation about, they're going to steal, we just put out the record. And, so what would happen was, it was very common at the time for reviewers to get a copy of a new album and review it and take the copy that they got, and for whatever reason, literally copy it and put it online. And so you would find these things on whatever LimeWire or whatever those things were called at the time. And bands were really, I remember there was an incident where somebody, a close friend not a friend of the band, but somebody who knew the band, had done just that. And we called him out and we're like, dude, why did you do that? And he was deeply apologetic, and we're still friends with this guy. He didn't mean to do it. He didn't think he was doing us a problem. So maybe, I guess this was way before that whole period. So I'm talking about something else entirely. But yeah, I don't know why we would be suspicious of someone knowing every word to the song. But anyway, I'm sure it worked out well in the long run. I guess that's the important thing, right?
I just assume I had probably just been listening to the album constantly for whatever period of time between I bought it and the time that the show came up, that I already knew the words and just sang along with it. I loved that album very much. I defend it. It's broken my heart to this day to see it in cutout bins and used sections for the last 30 years.
Yeah, A Date with the Smithereens, you're talking
knowing that I think it's an album that is one of their best. It's one of their career highlights.
The funny thing is that was made, A Date with the Smithereens was made in a studio downtown in New York where we unloaded all our gear into this small studio called the Magic Shop, which was in Soho. David Bowie famously made his final album there. It was a really famous studio. Unfortunately, it closed not too long after Bowie did that record. And it had an amazing soundboard in it. It had its beautiful old, really rare sound desk. And it was, Don Dixon. The whole process was really fun. And I was, intimately involved, setting up and tuning Dennis's drums and being there day after day. But the other thing was that Matthew, who turned out to be the lead singer of Not a Surf, was working at the front desk at the time. He was like making coffee and answering phones at the Magic Shop when we rolled in. And I had known Matthew as an acquaintance already for 10 years at that point. Hey, Matthew, what are you doing here? Like, I'm just working here. He's kind of apprenticing. And as a matter of fact, it turned out that at the same time, the Smithereens were around that same period. Matthew, and I guess late at night when the studio was not in use, he was bringing the early version of Not a Surf into that studio late at night when no one was using it to do early Not a Surf demos at night. So the first recordings I heard by Not a Surf were done there at late night in the Magic Shop. So a weird, weird coincidence. Well, I mean, the whole thing about my relationship, this period going from being a musician to being a roadie back to being a musician was really pivotal because I was sort of disenchanted. I'd spent all of the 80s and part of the 90s kind of trying to get successful, and it was like 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. It was very frustrating, as you can well understand, to be a musician sometimes. So I was kind of over it. And I was like, maybe this drumming thing, maybe I'll play the guitar. I have a number of things that I was thinking about doing. And when I got the call from Kevin, and then, so now for the next, starting in 93 through 94 into the middle of 95, I was with these guys intimately, and I was with them every night. I sat at Dennis's feet, literally, behind Mike's bass amp, the loudest bass rig in the world. I'm lucky I'm not deaf, because really, is there any bass player louder than Mike Mazzaros? Anybody? No. There's none. There's none. And Severo was supposed to have been a welcome relief for them because he was like half the volume. But I sat there every night and watching these guys and do what they did every night, play with all the, because the Smithereens never did anything by half. They hit the stage every night and they played like they'd never played those songs before. They always played like a full body kind of thing. And they loved being loud, and it was always like that. They never let up. And even when during the day they might have had arguments, things at the time were kind of, like I said, they were having some record company problems here and there, and they were frustrated. There was a lot of personal frustration going on interpersonally between the members of the band who could get really frustrated. But at the end of the day, when the lights went on and the amps were on and they put their guitars on and they made that thunderous noise that they make, everything was perfect. And watch them, to sit there watching Dennis from 3 feet away, he kind of chews his jaw a little bit while he plays. He does this sort of jaw chewing thing while he plays. And you know what I'm talking about? It's a sort of a natural thing he's doing as he's sort of concentrating on playing and listening. I know how drummers, every musician has some little quirk, and Dennis has kind of a jaw chew. Anyway, and he hits the drums so, he's what drummers call he plays, what's the word I'm looking for? It's called a rim shot. There's 2 ways to hit a snare drum. You either put the stick right in the middle of the drum and get a nice kind of soft, fat noise, or you put the stick across the edge of the drum where you also hit the metal rim of it, and you get this really loud crack, and that's the way Dennis Dyken plays the drums.
Like a Ringo 65 sound.
Exactly. It's a very, very specific, hard, cracking rock and roll drum sound. That's Dennis's style up and down the block. He doesn't really play any other way. I've, over the years, trained myself to play both ways, but that's how I played too. When I was in the Fuzztones, that's the only way I played, straight across the rim. It's loud, it's aggressive, and so I really identified with Dennis and his style of playing. And still these years later, I really feel I was so lucky to not sit at the feet of some heavy metal drummer or some whatever, but to sit at the feet of one of the greatest power pop rock drummers, I think, of his generation. I sat there and I watched him every night, and I can do that. And look, my friend Dennis, he's doing it. Look, I'm totally capable. And I don't know, you may remember, but at some point, Dennis, knowing that I was a drummer and trusting me, he used to go out at the end of the show and sing. And then I would go play the drums for a song or two. He'd play like Little Sister by Elvis or something. And he'd sing it out front.
I remember those nights.
That's right.
The Elvis set.
I remember the Elvis set at the end of that night. Right. In fact, I was going to bring it up. I was going to mention that I remember you playing.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite. I was so lucky to be able to do that. So it was an incredibly pivotal time for me, and to watch these guys up close, day after day, was really tremendous. I want to get some more Smithereens stories. What are your favorite, what's another favorite Smithereens memory that you guys have? Anything will do. Just riff.
Let let me tell you a story about Chopper.
Please, I want a good Chopper story. I miss him terribly.
This is, I guess, maybe about 1996.
Yes.
1995, 1996. It was the first time that Jim Babjack wanted to put his first solo band together and decided he wanted to try it out as a gig. So he booked a date at the Court Tavern.
Sure.
In New Brunswick, New Jersey.
One of their
which
favorite,
is one of the places.
One of their favorite
probably
places.
know. This is one of the places that they played early on in their careers very often.
Absolutely.
In fact, later on they would go back there. They recorded their live album there many years later.
That's correct.
And it was a good place for them to try things out. So Jimmy booked his band at the Court Tavern. It eventually became Buzzed Meg. And back then he called it the Don Juans that night. It was Jim Dennis, Kurt Ryle from the Gripweeds, and Vince Grogan, was the bass player.
And
Jim decided he wanted Chopper to be his roadie for that night.
Right. Oh, that
which we hired. A mistake. And he invited us to come to the show. So we came to the show, and I didn't know Chopper was going to be there. And by then, we had met Chopper about a year before and got to know him, and he knew us then. So at one point, before I had seen anybody, we got into the gig, waiting around for something to happen, and I feel this tap on the back of my shoulder. And now, as a roadie, I'm sure at some point during the time you had gone out to change a lead or change a drum head or get some sticks or something,
right,
and had Pat come up to you and yell, "Get the fuck off my stage!"
Of course, that was classic.
Okay. But I have to preface that with that. So I'm at the Court Tavern, just standing in front of the stage, waiting for something to happen because you're always nothing's going on at the point. People are just gathering and talking. And I feel a tap on my shoulder, and I turn around and here's Chopper, who just says, "Get the fuck off my stage!"
Yeah, yeah. Probably with a slightly different bent than Pat would muster.
That's my fondest memory of the man.
Oh,
that's what I remember so much about Chopper was that one time, really.
Yeah, that's another. I miss the both of them terribly. Denizio, of course, was a unique character who had an amazing way, and you recall his amazing way with the audience, how he could be blunt or gruff, but he had his sense of humor and his sort of, he was very personable style. He always was talking to you very directly. He never talked in stage speak. He spoke, he always had such a great sense of humor. My favorite Pat story was we were playing something kind of like a dinner theater somewhere. I can't remember where it was, but the stage had a series of tables that were kind of from the stage back. There were sort of long tables where people would sit. I guess maybe they had eaten and then the show would start. I can't remember if people were actually eating at the time. It's possible. But they were at these sitting anyway at these long tables in the room. Because usually the room for a rock show is empty. It's a big, everyone stands around. This had tables. I don't recall why. So the show starts and everyone's sitting at the tables. And, they're doing the show and they're into it. And Pat is clearly frustrated because he's not getting any energy. If an audience sitting down at tables, you're not getting any energy back. So he catches I'm sitting back behind the amps, and he catches my eye, and he calls me up as they're in the middle of a song. So I run up to him, and he yells over the band into my ear. He goes, "Hey, Ira, get me 3 folding chairs." I'm like, okay. And I run off stage and I find a couple of folding chairs backstage, and they come to the end of the song and I come out with the 3 folding chairs, and he goes, "Yeah, give one to Jim and give one to Mike." I put one down behind Mike, I put one down behind Jimmy, and I put one down under him. And he says, "Jimmy, Mike, sit down." And he sits down. They both sit down in the chairs, and he sits down and pulls the mic down, and he looks at the audience and he says, "Hi, we're the Smithereens from New Brunswick, New Jersey," whatever he said. "And if you all are going to sit down, we're going to sit down too." And then they launched into something like ba-da-da-da-da-da. They launched into one of those riffs, and the whole audience just jumped up out of their chairs, literally, they realized what a mistake they were all making. The audience was like, "Oh yeah, you're right." So to watch them play that sitting down, they were like, "Oh yeah," that made them stand up. It was genius. I don't know how he thought of that. I don't know if he'd done that before somewhere, but he knew that, "Hey, you gonna sit down? we're going to sit down too. And it changed the whole dynamic, and they all got up out of their chairs, and the rest of the show went on like it was just like perfect. That was the genius of Pat DiNizio. He knew how to read the audience. He knew how to get them to do what he wanted them to do. My other favorite story, I'm just going to tell stories of myself, was the night that they invited Dave Davies of the Kinks on stage. They were playing like a House of Blues in Los Angeles, if I'm not mistaken. And all day they were excited because Dave is going to come play songs. And you know what huge Kinks fans they are. They're tremendous Kinks fans, all of them. But particularly Mike and Jim and Dennis in particular. Huge, not that Pat wasn't, but I think the other three were really huge Kinks fans together. And so they were excited to have Dave come on. And so I think they played the sort of main set. And then I don't know if it was in the main set or maybe in an encore. Ladies and gentlemen, Dave Davies, applause, applause, applause. And they start to play whatever they play. Like, I don't know. How many famous Dave Davies songs are there? There's Death of a Clown. There's Love Me Till the Sun Shines. And then after that, they start to get even more obscure, and even people who kind of know the Kinks. So they got into like the third song, and DiNizio's backstage, and he calls me back over. He's waiting in the wings. And he says to me, he goes, Ira, Dave Davies is fucking ruining my show. I'm like, yeah, he is, man. This is fucking. He said, what are these songs? Like, they started to get into a fourth song, which is even more. They were like going down the Kinks rabbit hole, and you know the Kinks rabbit hole is rather deep and very wide. There's a lot of Kinks songs that few people know, except those three guys who know could play every song in like the back of their hand. So he goes. So basically, what he ended up doing was they were almost about to start a fourth or maybe a fifth song, and Pat walked on stage. Thank you, ladies. Like, ushered him quickly off the stage and finished the set. You know, they went into their typical end of the set. They had kind of 2 or 3 songs like House We Used to Live In and so on and so forth that would always end the set. There was like 2 or 3 songs that would kind of amp up and amp up and amp up. That their ending was always very powerful. So he didn't want Dave Davies, as great as he was, to sort of blow the energy and the rhythm of the set, which was starting to wane considerably after about 4 obscure Kinks songs. So he ushered, thank you very much, and sort of, thanks, Dave. And they continued on. After the show, I stayed on stage as we did, sort of take everything apart and, put everything away. And they went up to the dressing room to, I guess, party. After the show, there was a party and meet and greet, and, they took pictures together. And evidently what happened was, this is the best part, Dave was a little disgruntled about being ushered summarily off the stage. And now by the time the Smithereens finished the show and went up to sort of take pictures with the local press or whatever, Dave had a few in him. So he was kind of a little lit and unhappy. So evidently the story goes that as they were trying to take a picture, the 5 of them together, Dave put his arm around Pat's neck and then pulled him down toward his crotch, pulled Pat's head down into, like, as if, like, suck my dick, and he said to him, so you didn't want me to play any more songs, eh? And they almost got into a fight, evidently. They almost came to blows, I was told. I wasn't there. I wish I had seen this. But Dave and Pat almost went at it because he was unhappy about being cut off. He felt he was cut off short. But I think Pat was well within his rights. As a matter of fact, I think he did the right thing. So I'm on the DiNizio team, not on the Davis team on this one. But that to me is a classic Pat DiNizio story.
Well, Dave did appear at the memorial show.
I'm sure he did.
For Pat. So I'm going to say that he had no hard feelings.
Good. I guess he let it go. But I think this was a classic for the Davis brothers were notorious fighters. They liked to fight and then make up. I think he and his brother Ray were very notorious for fighting and then being friends the next day. I think this is classic Davis behavior. So but I also think that Dave understood how much the Smithereens loved the Kinks. I think this was very clear. There's obviously a lot of Kinks in the Smithereens. What else? What else can we tell? What other fond memories do you have? I want just to get some.
I'll tell you my favorite Pat story. I miss him an awful lot, and there's always a part of me with him at all times, because one night, and I don't exactly remember how long ago this was, maybe the mid-'90s, but it was a few years after his daughter, Liza, had been born.
Yes.
And we were at a show, and just hanging around, and the band arrives at the show, And Pat sees me and comes up and says, "Hey, I got to show you something." He takes out his wallet to show me a picture of Liza, his daughter. I guess it was like her first school picture. And he says, "Look at this." I said, "Oh, that's wonderful." And I give him a big hug for that. And he's been holding a cigarette at the time. And as he goes to give me a hug after showing me this picture of Liza, the cigarette brushes on my shoulder, and sparks fly everywhere. One of them lands right on my thumb.
Oh, dear.
And burns a big hole in my thumb. To this day, got a scar on my right thumb from this cigarette burn from Pat after giving me a hug after showing me his daughter. So I've got a piece of Pat DiNizio with me at all times.
That is beautiful. That's a great story, Rich. I love that.
That's my favorite memory. That's my favorite memory of Pat because I can never. It was painful, but I'm glad it's here.
Yeah, I wish I had physical DiNizio scar somewhere on me. That's hilarious.
2 tattoos. I got scars.
Yeah, it's much more value, much more real, much more. You earned that. Kathy, you got any scars?
What about you, Kathy? Well, you got to. What's your favorite memory of all this stuff?
No pressure. No pressure.
I don't know. It was some club in, I believe it was Harrisburg.
Right.
We were hanging around, waiting for the stage to be set up, and after successfully, shooing off some barflies, trying to get us to buy Jägermeisters.
That's a weird stuff.
Yeah. You actually came on stage and saw our little front line group.
Yeah.
And you're like, "Hey, are you guys thirsty?" And we're like, "Well, yeah."
Yeah.
And you like share with us the stash of beer that were chilling on Jim's side of the stage.
Really?
And to this, swear to God, it was the best beer I've ever had.
Wow, that was pretty nervy. Why would I do that? That seems like a roadie
I don't
no-no.
know, but it was great.
I have no idea what led up to that at all. Yeah,
that's weird. That's like that seems like the thing like a roadie would get fired for like giving away Jim's beer.
Probably,
Maybe I had some vendetta against Jim that I forgot about. I don't know.
Probably he would have let it go.
Yeah, no, I never. Jim and I got to say, like those. I mean, I got along great with all of them. Like they were. The memory of like traveling those like 2.5 years with them, less than that, 2 years. Was just like really marvelous. Like I said, sometimes they were a little edgy. There was some bad stuff going on. Mike could be a little bit volatile, but all in all, like I had the best time of my life just watching these guys like make this loud racket every night. It was just so visceral, so satisfying. This loud rock and roll band, and it sort of relit a fire under me as a musician. Like this is the way to do it. Like no bells, no whistles, no loops, no samples, no triggers. As a drummer in the 80s, which had just finished at that time, the whole thing for drummers, for the most part, was to try to sound like a drum machine, because that was the sound of the day. This big sort of leaden, everything was like gated, and drum sounds were these big unnatural things. And as a drummer, you stylistically, though I had come from a Ringo sort of background like Dennis, but because I was sort of trying to be a modern drummer, a lot of my drumming style was being dictated by what modern music was at that time. It was this very sort of sort of like New Order, machined out kind of thing. And so I had spent a number of years trying to, programming drum machines and playing along and trying to sound like a machine, which ultimately was just boring and anti-musical for me. And I was so happy to sort of be with a band who didn't give a rat's ass about any of that stuff. It was just like plug in, and go. Like I was so profound. It was such a slate cleaner for me. Like, just a band, amplifiers, guitars, and drums. Boom. It was like, it seems so simple now, but at the time for me, it was kind of a revelation that I could get away from all this kind of technology and just go back to, cables and guitars and an amp. Their setups were very simple, and none of them used elaborate pedals or anything. Did any of them have pedals on the ground? Did Jim might have had what a fuzz box or a line.
I don't recall it.
I don't think any.
Jimmy doesn't. Jimmy, I don't think Jimmy uses pedals. I think Pat used to have a rat pedal that he liked.
Right, that was probably it. I know Mike did now. I mean, did they?
That's probably it. Jimmy would get mad when he had to use a volume pedal just for solos.
Right, yeah, he did.
He loved going right into this amplifier. He doesn't like. As far as I know, anytime he has to put a pedal on there, he hates it.
Well, I'm going to ask him about that when I talk to him, because I think they were like Who fans in that way. They liked that big like guitar through an amplifier kind of sound. I remember when I started going on the road with them, they had quite a guitar setup. Both Pat and Jim had, I believe, both had double Marshalls. They had like Jim had 2 Marshalls, Pat had 2 Marshalls, and Mike had 4 Guild Hartke 4x10 bass amps. It was like 8. It was 8 cabinets. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Stacked up like Legos with 2 heads on top. It was a really loud rig.
You feel Mike's bass before he plugged in.
Say again?
Yeah.
You could feel Mike's bass before he even plugged in.
Oh yeah,
most nights.
You could hear the low end. Yeah, it was incredible.
You looked at that thing and you knew you were going to feel it in your chest.
Oh yeah, no, he was really into it. And one of my favorite things was, and the other thing about the Smithereens, and not, I guess the fans wouldn't really even know this, was that they did not like to sound check. Most bands spend an hour in the late afternoon, I need more of this in my monitor and so forth. The Smithereens hated doing that. They never did it. They rarely did it. And so that was my job. I'd set up Dennis's drums, and Kevin would have set up all the guitars and amps. And then once we got a drum sound, I'd pick up Mike's bass, and I'd pick up Jim's guitar, and I would go guitar to guitar, and I got to play them for a half an hour myself every day, which was so much fun to play these big, loud guitars through amplifiers. Great! Here's my favorite story. We played a show. It was like outdoors, somewhere, a lovely afternoon, somewhere. It was thousands of people. There had been 3,000 or 4,000 people out in this thing. And before the show actually starts, just before the band walks on stage, what you usually do is called a line check, where you just make sure that all the mics are live and that everything's on and running and buzzing, and that when you tap on the mics, it's all running, and that the amplifiers are all not in standby anymore. So when they walk on, everything's on. It's called a line check, and so that was my job. I ran out. I sort of boom, boom, boom. I plunked the bass. I hit the Pat's guitar, and then when I picked up Jim's guitar, I had his. I don't know what he was playing. Jimmy played a number of guitars. I don't think it was his Rickenbacker. I can't remember. I'm trying to remember what guitars Jim was playing at the time. I know Pat favored a Stratocaster, and Jim had a number of guitars that he played. But however it was, I picked up his guitar, and I looked out at this audience, and I played the opening riff to "Tie Your Mother Down" by Queen. Down, I diddle it down, I diddle it down, I diddle it, bang, 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 I diddle it, and the whole place went. I was like, oh man, it was so powerful, and they reamed me out. After I got backstage, like, never, ever do that again. Like that's another roadie no. Don't go out before the band starts and play a recognizable riff through on the guitars. It's just really unprofessional. It's not done. I had to learn that one the hard way. But man, was that satisfying to feel like Brian May with this guitar through these amps in front of a couple of thousand people just for that 10 seconds. I'm like, oh, I get it. This is great. So I never made that mistake again. But
but it's a good story. It's a good story.
Yeah.
If it was '94, he was probably playing the Telecaster most of the time.
Did he have it was a Telecaster, right? Because I know
that was the first year he got Telecaster. And believe you me, for we gearheads, when Jim Babjack picked up something besides a Rickenbacker,
it was a big deal.
That was a big bit of news.
Yeah, sure. Because that was his one. He had that. I don't remember the model number. 360. I don't know which one he had. A particular sort of red maroon color one.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know the model number. I've been studying Rickenbacker.
He still plays that red Rickenbacker all the time. He doesn't travel with it very much because it's a little more. It's a more fragile guitar now.
Yeah.
But He plays that one still, and he plays the Telecaster because that's kind of his go-to travel guitar.
Sure. Yeah, those things are unbreakable. I mean, they're just battle. I just recently, actually, myself, being an amateur guitarist, finally bought, after obsessing about it for months and months, bought myself a Telecaster. And it is a really, really a fun guitar to play. It really, it does almost anything. And it feels good in your hands. I can understand why now I understand why so many guitarists really favor it as a go-to, because it's a fantastic instrument. And the Rickenbacker is particular. You know, it has a very particular type of bright, ringy tone. Whereas the Stratocaster, you can dial in a number of different kinds of sounds at it. The Rickenbacker is kind of particular. But yeah, once you get used to it, I guess you like that feel. It's always a beautiful instrument. I remember that was really Kevin's domain. I didn't really, he spent the whole afternoon. He would change. If I'm not mistaken, Kevin would change all the strings every day on every guitar that they had used the night before. He wasn't going to take a chance that anything was going to break. He changed all the batteries and all the whatever. I don't know if they even had tuners on, because nowadays guitarists, they plug into a tuner and you hit the tuner and it silences the guitar. You tune and then you hit the tuner again and you're on. But I don't remember if they even had that. So he would change all the strings, all the batteries, and whatever effects pedals. And the other thing Kevin had to do during the show, you might recall this, Rich, was that Pat, as he sang, was very, as part of his style, he was very spitty. He kept a lot of spit in his mouth as he sang. I didn't keep spit in his mouth. He spat it out. And so the microphone, and he generally sang into like a 57 or a 58, and he would sing into this mic, and after 3 or 4 songs, all the spit would get onto the capsule of the microphone, and the sound would start to degrade. He would start from going clear, and then it would start to get kind of muddy, and he would lose all the top end from the spit on the capsule. So Kevin would have to. So Pat would maybe hear this in his fold-back monitors, and he'd call Kevin out, and Kevin would bring another 57, switch them out, and then Kevin would take the other 57, open it up in his little gear world back there. He'd open up the top of the capsule and take out some Q-tips and some rubbing alcohol, and he'd clean all the capsules off. He always had 2 or 3 microphones ready to go because Pat would spit them up.
Oh yeah.
I've never seen that happen to any other artist.
And they would change it.
Our little group would get together every now and then, and the microphone changed. Okay, there's number 1.
Oh yeah, you would watch that.
Microphone 2 would be like the count from Sesame Street. Two microphone changes.
Yeah, I've never seen that really happen with any other artist. But Kevin was like always looking for that signal from Pat to come out and switch the mics out. I thought that was remarkable. They had a great symbiosis. He and Pat. I think. I think he and Pat had some sort of like sixth sense together. I think Kevin really loved Pat, and Pat really was close with Kevin. They were thick as thieves, the two of them. But I missed them both terribly. Kevin, we lost him a couple of years later too. We lost him in the late 90s. He passed away sadly from some whatever number of cancers that had metastasized. It was just brutal. But I miss him terribly, and of course Pat as well. What else? I don't want to talk about bad things. I want to talk about happy things. Any more? Come on, 1 or 2 more happy stories, and I'll let you go on your merry way.
You changing the strings on Pat's guitar for him?
I did that one time. Pat played a show in I guess it was Allentown, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Scranton, Pennsylvania.
Scranton.
Tinks. It's Scranton, Pennsylvania. He was doing this whole thing by himself.
Yeah.
First time I think he'd done that sort of thing.
Yeah.
About 1996, 97, I'm not sure exactly.
Uh-huh.
And we knew each other at that point, and he was playing these big Gretsch acoustic country gentlemen.
Right, with a sort of a triangle sound hole on it.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly the one.
Right. It's like, like an acoustic, like a jumbo acoustic, a kind of orange jumbo acoustic guitar. Beautiful.
Yeah. And we'd met up before the show, and we were kind of hanging around a little bit. And he said, "I got to change the strings on this thing. I don't have anybody to change. I really don't feel like doing it."
Yeah.
So I said, "I'll change them for you." So I sat there and changed the strings on this big country gentleman.
Oh, nice.
For him before this show.
Are you a guitarist, Rich? You must be.
I don't play anymore because I've got some nerve damage in my hand. But I was a player at that point.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Well, I do miss it, but well, what can you do?
Yeah, life goes on. Life goes on. Okay, well, I mean, unless you got
cigarette scars and nerve damage. I don't think it has anything to do.
That's going to be the title of your book: Cigarette Scars and Nerve Damage. That's catchy.
Oh, goodness.
I will buy that. No problem.
So many things. We met some of our best friends at Smithereens shows.
Yeah.
Not only people behind the scenes, and not the band, and people like you and Chopper, but just people from the audience. There was a group of us that got together in 1995 at a Smithereens show, a group of about 6 of us.
Yeah.
And we constantly then for the next 30 years or so, or however many years after that, would get at least 20 years after that, we got together like 2-3 years. Anytime the Smithereens came around, this group of 6 people would get together and do whatever shows were on there. And we were some of the best friends with those people that I met at Smithereens shows.
I love it. That's so. I'm sorry. I don't mean.
We always stood at the front, and we were like we were almost like the security at the front line.
Right. Well, that's the thing.
Because we wanted them to have, no matter what the audience was like, we wanted there to be happy faces in front.
Exactly, and this is and I learned this myself. I mean, I watch you guys every night, and this is the first time I had done some tours before, but touring with the Smithereens was sort of like a new thing for me. Like on a tour bus was very special, and seeing night after night. And again, I would see these people like you and friends of theirs. I'd see them repeatedly. I'm like, oh, this is so interesting. I'd never really witnessed that before. I mean, to some degree with the fuzz tones, but not at this level. And of course, people like Beetle. Remember Beetle Bob? Do you remember?
No, I'm not sure if I knew him.
Okay, well,
okay, yes, yeah, that's right.
He was another sort of oddball character that would show up. Well, he was like a Midwestern guy. I can't remember what city he lived in. He might have been in Minneapolis, or he was a Midwestern or a central kind of. I can't remember where he lived. He was not a Pennsylvania guy. He was more, I think, maybe Minnesota or Chicago. Anyway, yeah. And then I started to experience it myself with Not a Surf. After a couple of years, you started to see these friendly faces like, at every band, that's the thing that every band, whether they know it or not, that's the thing that they want. A community of people who love them and follow them and are there for them and are always, you're always happy to see those people. And they, like you, they come right to the front of the stage. They're beaming. Like when you walk on stage as a musician, and before you've even played a note, you see like a sea of people smiling, happy that you're there, you showed up. You've already won. Like you can't lose. Like even if you fall over, fart, die, barf, whatever, like it doesn't matter. You've already won. Like everyone's there. Oh, he fell over, farted, and died. Well, that was the greatest thing I've ever seen in my life. You know what I'm saying? Like you can't lose an audience of friends like that. You just can't lose. And it's what every band, I think, in their heart of hearts, whether they know it or not, really, really desires. And the Smithereens certainly had that in spades, having a community of people like that. I'll tell you a funny story. It happened today. As you are probably aware, there's a Facebook group, like a Smithereens fan Facebook group. I'm sure you weighed in on it.
Oh, yeah.
So today, I don't know if you saw this. I think this is the kind of thing like made for me because I'm a natural troll. I hate dumb questions. So someone posted on the page today. Hey, could you guys answer a question for me? Does anyone ever call the Smithereens the Reens? Question mark, like. Oh,
you put that up, did you?
No, I didn't put that up. Someone.
I saw that today.
Someone posted that, and I answered, and I looked, and already whoever posted that, there had already been like a dozen answers, all of which were no, absolutely not. I would never have the disrespect to call the Smithereens the Reens. Who would do that? And I was like, my answer was, yes, they do. And why wouldn't they? That's a natural, logical shortening of Smithereens. What are you talking about? Like, I was the only person on there who was like, what do you mean? Of course. I said, and then I'm like, wait a minute. And I went, and then 10 minutes later, I went back and go, by the way, as a matter of fact, people, if the Smithereens themselves published a fanzine called, wait for it, Reen Thoughts. Anyone remember that one? So like, yeah, you can call them the Reens. And I said, like, as a matter of fact, from now on, I'm going to call them the Reens exclusively just to annoy the pants out of all of you. I mean, I just can't believe how people like, I just can't believe how uptight people are about, it's disrespectful. They're the Smithereens. I mean, I know these people. I know these people love the Smithereens. I understand that, and I love that they love the Smithereens. But come on, that's disrespectful to call them the Reens. I don't know what people are thinking. This is the kind of thing that's designed to drive me absolutely over the edge, and I can't not again today. I also am not surprisingly a member of some Ludwig drums, kind of like people talking about vintage drums and all this, or drummers, and drummers are as bad as fans of bands can be. Drummers, oh my God, they're the worst. So out of, typical, someone goes, hey, name your top 5 favorite drummers. And he puts his top 5 list, Joe, Bill, Steve, Arthur, and Murray. I'm like,
Arthur Murray.
Well, not Arthur Murray, but you know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, he names 4 really famous drummers that everyone knows. And in among that list was another drummer whose name I'd never, ever heard. And listen, I'm a drummer all my life. And I think I know the names of most of the big famous drummers. And there was a name in that list I did not recognize. And I said to myself, this guy is trying to poke me into saying that he wants me to ask who that guy is and why is he putting this guy on the list. I said, I'm not even bothering looking up who this clown 5th drummer is. Maybe it was who knows who this guy, the drummer, was. But I put my list of 5, here's my 5 favorite that I put on the list. I said Paul McCartney, who is a very fine drummer, Meg White, who is the kind of drummer who makes drummers who take drums really seriously, makes them crazy. I love Meg White as a drummer.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but I think she's a great drummer. So I put Paul McCartney, I put Meg White, I put Mickey Dolenz, who is the most unorthodox drummer. He's a singing drummer, but a drummer nonetheless, and plays a very weird setup. And then I put Stevie Wonder, who happens to be a spectacular drummer. And then I put, and that guy with one arm, because I respect him for continuing to play the drums with one arm, Rick.
Oh, Def Leppard, Rick Allen?
Rick Allen. I didn't put Rick Allen. I said that guy with one arm. Because I was because I'm a troll. Like you people got to be kidding me. But when you say name your top 5 favorite, you're just looking for an argument. You're not gonna get consensus among drummers. You ever see those top 100 lists, top 100 guitarists, top 100 drummers, and everyone's like, well, why is Ringo in the top 5? He sucks. I can't stand that kind of stuff. And then it was all bands who looked a certain way. Then it was all these then unfortunately it coincided with the rise of metal, which was just tragic. Because I'm not really a fan of that, that whole post Quiet Riot kind of, hair metal. It's just to me is let's not even go there. I don't want to. Again, I don't want to speak ill. If you don't have something nice to say, just don't say anything at all. Okay, I think have we covered all our Smithereens grounds? Have we forgotten? Is there anything we need to talk about that we haven't talked about, Smithereens-wise?
Gee, I don't know. I just had a heck of a good time.
Yeah, no, me too.
I had a good time with the Smithereens. I had a great time with NRBQ. I just had a great time with music.
Yeah, no, it's central in my life. I'm so happy, and like I said, watching the Smithereens night after night put me back on track to being a musician. And then luckily the Not a Surf showed up right at the same time. It kind of coincided, and then I was kind of primed to really go back and I'm going to just play in a band. It was a guitar. Not a Surf was we're a power trio, guitar, bass, and drums. That was it. And so I really got that full, and I had that same experience with the two of them, this feeling of flight. When we would play together, it was like a plane taking off. It was just an unbelievable experience because I like I said, I'd known the other two guys in Not a Surf as acquaintances for about 10 years. They were nice guys, and we had met because they had been fans of the Fuzztones, and so they would come see the Fuzztones, and they would. Like you would go to meet the Smithereens, they would come backstage and try to meet the Fuzztones. And so I met them on a couple of occasions. Like, oh, you're nice guys. And then, I'd run into them in rehearsal studios here and there. And they had one band or another band. And then at one point, they sought me out. And they gave me a cassette demo. This would have been in 1990, end of 1994, I believe. They gave me this little cassette, which I took on the road with me with the Smithereens that spring. We went on tour, I think, with like Ben Folds and Sixpence None the Richer, and the Grays were on that tour. It was a lot of really fun bands, and I had that cassette with me. And hey, guy, listen to this band. I think I'm gonna join this band. And like, oh, these guys are pretty good. I was really excited. And when we played together, and we only played maybe a dozen shows together. Literally, we played 10 shows together before we got signed to Elektra Records. All those shows felt like I was so excited to play those songs, and I liked them so much. It was the same thing. It kind of had that family feel where it was kind of a mutual respect, admiration society where these guys are great, and they like me because I used to be in that band that they really loved. And so we all and then the energy of that just like made the music even like more powerful. And we really all tore into it. And that sort of, when you play music when you play music, it's sort of a Zen thing that I learned. If you try to make music to impress people, you're going to fail. If you try to play music to make yourself happy, you will succeed. That's the difference. If you're trying to hey, let's show everyone how great we are, people will be bored and put off. But if a band creates energy amongst itself and sort of leans in, and the band just explodes because they're all into it, like the Smithereens do, everyone gets drawn in because you don't see shit like that. You see bands trying to sort of be slick or cool or entertain, tap dancing, spinning, blah, 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 which is okay, whatever, Vegas. But when you see a band who are completely captivated and completely in the moment and eyes closed, they're making it for you fresh on the spot, and they're into it together, that draws an audience in. And then from there, of course, they can be entertaining and so forth. But the basic impetus is this sort of band making this sound together, and then the audience gets drawn in. And that's what I learned from the Smithereens, was this sort of the Zen, and Not a Surfer were that way too. They were, they didn't send any demos out. We didn't scout for, A&R guys. We just played some shows, and everyone's like, hey, these guys are happening. And we were the energy we were throwing off was remarkable, not because we were trying to throw off energy, because we would just do that. Just was what was happening. So and that was those 2 years I learned a lot about where to focus your energy as a musician. Don't focus it on the audience. Focus it on the band, and the audience will come to you. Don't go to them; they will come to you. That's. Maybe I should work on that philosophy a little bit longer. But that's what I saw, and that came from watching the Smithereens night after night, just pounding it out with full throttle. It was really an amazing, life-changing experience. And every time I see Dennis and Jim too, I pretty much say the same thing. I can never thank them enough for just for allowing me to sort of be that close to them and learn what I did. It was so incredibly important for me as an individual. I'll never be able to thank them enough. Never. And so I thank you for being my guests today and talking about the Smithereens, who we both love. We all love tremendously.
Thanks for inviting us.
Thank you so much, Ira.
No, I love you guys.
I'd like to thank Rich and Kathy Firestone for sharing their Smithereens stories. Really, any artist would kill to have fans as faithful as these two. Our next episode will be a conversation with the Smithereens rhythm and lead guitarist Jim Babjack. I hope you'll tune in for that. Until then, good night from all of us here at A Hard Day's Late Night with Ira.
It's a hard day's late night with Ira.